and I am calling our special board work session to order. May we please have the roll?
President Nadir,
Present?
Ms. Beckerly,
Present.
Mr. Brown,
I'm here.
Mr. Cole,
I am present.
Dr. Pierce,
Present.
Mr. Ragland,
Here.
Vice President Reyes.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. This evening, we want to celebrate, before we get started, Relationship Week. So I want to wish everyone a hello, because that is what today is all about. Start with hello. So I want to see if we can share our poster. And I want to give all of our board members an opportunity to tell our Columbus community hello, because offering a simple hello to everyone can really help people feel valued and appreciated. And we have more than 100 non-English languages and dialects spoken among our students and families. So we want to take a minute to embrace you and say hello. So board members, we didn't practice this, and now I can't see you. So go ahead and just shout out your hellos.
Shalom Haverim, which means hello to all my friends in Hebrew.
Hola.
Go ahead.
Hola a nuestros estudiantes y nuestras familias. Les pedimos que hoy hablen con todos y les digan hola.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you in Arabic.
Yes, it is. Walaikum assalam. I will say hello in Wolof. It is a West African language, Nagadef.
Sawati Ka, hello in Thai.
So I'm from Columbus, Ohio, born and bred. So I'm gonna just say, hey, y'all.
That's Ebonics.
Nah, that's just Brittany Hills down the street. Holt Avenue, Brittany Hills all day. That's what that is.
Shout out to the North Side. Yes, ma'am.
All right, and so the rest of the week, we have tomorrow is One Act of Kindness Day. So we hope that all of you will give just someone one act of kindness. It can be small or big, whatever you're feeling. It really helps people know that you care, and we all need that right now. Wednesday is forgiveness. Finding it in your heart to forgive and being humble in the way that we approach each other, knowing that people aren't always perfect and you can forgive others, and offering an apology. On Thursday, it is Celebrate Diversity, because that is one of the things that makes us who we are. And we want to celebrate all of those wonderful varieties that we come in. So whether that be our cultures, ethnicities, language, personalities, our stories, just who we are and where we come from, all of it makes us uniquely us. And we really want to embrace that. And then on Friday, we're going to celebrate No One Eats Alone. And even in this virtual space, grab on a Zoom call and eat with your friends or colleagues. Just share a moment together and connect over a meal. So this is Relationship Week, and I'm going to offer really quickly Cheryl Ward. Is there anything else that you would like to say about this week? And Misty, if you want to stop sharing so we can see Cheryl.
Thank you, President Adair. We are just excited. This initiative has happened several years, and we appreciate the board's support and the district support. It is a reminder that we are all in this together, and that our district is diverse and it's amazing and it's unique, and not that we just do it on one week, but we do it year round, but we do spell out special attention and recognition of this week as we continue to build safe schools and climates and connectivity, so that our young people, our parents, and our staff recognize and know and just take time to breathe and celebrate one another. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity for you all extending that announcement and information this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also, I know on social media, we are going to be pushing information out about a relationship week. And I think we even have some videos. So be on the lookout, community, for some videos about relationship week. Thank you, Cheryl, to you and your team and everyone who's going to participate this week.
Thank you.
All right, board members, let's look at our agenda. We just have one really important item and one lengthy discussion, I am sure. And we are going to continue working with AJ Crable from Council Great City Schools on the 5-year strategic plan goal setting. And then after that, we will adjourn. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any additions or changes? Seeing none, please call the roll.
President Adair,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Ragland,
Yes.
Vice President Reyes.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you so much. And we will welcome AJ Crable from Council Great City Schools, who will lead us from here on out. Hi, AJ.
Good evening. Always a joy to be with you all. Thanks for having me back. Last time we had this conversation, we took the next step in the process, and that step was to really walk through the document that the superintendent put together, this one pager that articulated was the long-term vision, this portrait of a graduate that describes the community's vision for what it looks like to be a graduate from Columbus City Public Schools 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Once the board had achieved a measure of consensus on the long-term vision, then it started chipping away on the near-term vision, looking at what are the goals that the school system needs to accomplish on its trajectory towards a long-term vision, but that needs to accomplish in the next 5 years. And then we started to have a conversation about looking at what are the community's values that have to be honored in that short-term period. So we got through much of the goals. These really describe the community's vision as interpreted by the board. But we also need to get to today is looking at the community's values, which are the guardrails. And so before we dive into that, Dr. Dixon, is there anything that you wanted to share?
Yes, what I've done, if Misty, if you can pull up the document, please, and we go to the next slide, please. And this is that one pager that AJ talked about, and we did update those in some areas. We didn't have the latest iteration in the last meeting. And so you would see those when we talk about the guardrails, fund intervention supports, prioritize student connections, allocate resources equitably, and ensure a culturally responsive staff. And so tonight I have some of my staff members here who are going to help facilitate the discussions around those 4 guardrails. And then the last under strategic priorities, that language under priority 3, strong learning communities, that was updated as well. So I wanted you to see that we did update this one pager to reflect all the things that you gave me input on and of the language, and those things are updated. And then the next slide, we talked about the last meeting, again, the board goals, strengthening reading proficiency, develop portrait-ready graduates, and close opportunity gaps. And so the team, what we are working on is making sure we define those clearly. You gave some feedback on the reading proficiency, and also gave feedback in all of those areas. And the team, we're working on now to finalize the additional metrics under each of these goals. And then we're going to bring those back for you for your review. But we are clear, I am clear that these are the 3 goals. And then the next one, and before we get to that, we go back to AJ, and then AJ, what the team is going to do, we're going to talk through each of those guardrails with the leader of those guardrails, that it'd be making sure that we get all of this completed. and have a clear understanding of what we can measure and make sure those measurements are clear, those leaders are on with me tonight. So I can move forward when you are ready to.
Yeah, and so last time we did talk through these 3 board goals. As you heard from your superintendent, the language of these 3 conceptually doesn't change, but there's a lot of feedback that you all offered on the metrics. So that will come back to you. And I know some of you reached out and shared ideas, and so I've taken all of that and provided feedback to the superintendent. And so we'll get that to you. So this evening, what we really want to do is try to reach a place of consensus around the 4 guardrails. We've already made some adjustments to the language of them based on the last conversation, even though we didn't do a deep dive into them. But now what I've asked the superintendent to do is to come and to bring her team each of these 4 guardrails, each of these kind of key values of the community that you all have lifted up, really speak, are led by different members of her team. And so what I asked is that she and her team members be with us this evening to walk through them. And so, Madam Superintendent, if you could take us to guardrail number 1.
Okay. Thank you. So guardrail number 1, we changed the title to say that we're going to fund all tiers of support. We wanted to make sure that our guardrail was aligned with our MTSS formula. And so we state here, the superintendent would not allow the multi-tier systems of supports for students' needs to be underfunded. So I would like to turn this over to Dr. Terry Breeden, and she is going to talk about what that potentially will look like for making sure that we honor this guardrail.
Good evening. I'm honored to be here tonight as you talk about some of the most important work a board can do, which is their strategic plan. As I looked at your guardrail, the way it was written, I saw the word intervention. And I do know that in our multi-tiered support model, we use intervention, but I was afraid that if we didn't talk of tiers of support, it sounded more like a deficit. And tier 1 is really not a deficit model. Maybe I didn't capture exactly it, but I just thought if we talk intervention, someone thinks that it's not positive. If you look at our diagram there, you will see when you're in the green zone, you'll see the small bullets under that these are actions that you do for all students. I like the word universal interventions, but they're for all students, they're preventative, and they're proactive. So what this would do is it would make sure that some of the issues that came out of our PDK audit would be funded. For example, there's a lot of professional development in there where teachers will learn how to use the new curriculum. That would be a preventative, proactive approach that everyone is well acquainted with the curriculum. As we look at our test scores, we see that our students are not proficient. Well, we need to do an intervention that is preventative, proactive across schools, but it's not a deficit model. So that was one reason for the change. Of course, then we might have students in the yellow, which could be a year or more behind in certain subjects. And those would be that's one indicator of when you might need to do your yellow interventions, which are some students or your at-risk students. It's a rapid response. It's targeted. It's not to last forever. It may be a small intervention group that for these 2 weeks, we work on a particular skill, and then those students have caught up or gained that knowledge, and then they would once again be in the universal part of this pyramid. And then, of course, even after we've done targeted group intervention, at times we're still not successful meeting the students' needs. So then, of course, we would need to fund and also begin intensive. So I think when I look at this chart, the thing that helps me think the most about it is that we would be sure that we would fund universal approaches, targeted approaches, and intensive approaches to making sure our students are meeting their needs. And also not just in the academics, but also in the behavioral system that we have.
How is the administration suggesting that compliance with the board's guardrail be measured?
I think you would have to look at the various measure that this intervention support plan is being done. For example, if it was academic, the academic side, we of course would look at our both our summative and our formative assessments to see if we're meeting the needs, would be how that would measure. On the behavioral side, it might be, for example, one thing we're working on very hard right now is attendance. So we would look at the attendance rate. But as we develop those measures more, we could be more specific.
Do you all have a timeline for that degree of specificity? I suspect it's going to be challenging for the board to be prepared to move forward on either the goals or the guardrails, absent having little more clarity on how these things will be measured. Because essentially the way that this is sorted out is that the board says, here are the high level priorities. And then the administration comes back and says, operationally, here's how we'll be able to measure those priorities. But when you come back with that as administration, essentially you're offering your interpretation of what the board has offered. And so it's going to be difficult for the board to be prepared to move forward with either goals or the guardrails, absent knowing how the administration is interpreting it. And the metrics that you propose to use to monitor progress is the administration's interpretation. And so I think this is going to be helpful for the board this evening to have some clarity about what your thinking is and kind of the direction of your thinking. And there could definitely be some back and forth on that. But we won't really be able to close out the conversation about goals or guardrails until the board has some clarity around what is your understanding of how these will be measured. And if that doesn't match up with the board's expectation, they won't ask you to change your measures. They'll need to make changes to the goal or guardrail language to make it more clear what they had intended. And then you'll come back with metrics for that. And so because it winds up being a bit of an iterative process, the sooner that the board can have clarity on that, the more quickly it'll be possible for the administration to move forward with your strategic planning process, which kind of continues to be on somewhat of a hold until you actually know what you're building a strategy to accomplish. And so if it's not going to be this evening, and I guess really this is more targeted for the superintendent, then it would be helpful for us to think about what after this evening, after we've gotten some high level clarity around the guardrails, we'll want to have leave this evening with a date for when will we be able to go over the metrics for both the goals and guardrails. And then at that point, the board's work on this part of the process starts to come to a completion and completely hands the baton to you all to move forward with strategic planning. But it is going to be really hard for you all to do. Like, I worry about you all being held up because as we get into this, because there will be back and forth, my concern is that you all could start down a path and then the board switch gears and go a different direction with one of its goals or guardrails because of a conversation inspired by the metrics and a more clarified understanding they have of it. And then that cause you all to have to completely redo work that you have in process. And so just the sooner we can bring this part to conclusion to the board's satisfaction, then the sooner we can be certain that whatever you all are developing for school year 21-22 doesn't wind up needing to be redone if it's in any way in conflict with where the board lands. And so that's, I wanted to spell out that the more full process, just to make sure you all had a sense of what the next steps were, so that we could keep you all on track with the path you're proceeding with. So I don't know that that changes your presentation this evening about the guardrails, but it does, for me, lift up that if we're not going to dig into metrics this evening, that we'll have to have a subsequent meeting where the metrics are revealed, and where the board has an opportunity to debate that, and that only after that then the board can put the final can give its final blessing on, okay, for the next 5 years, here are the things that we are going to be focused on. And then it's completely handed off to the administration. The board has done their part, and now it's entirely a question of implementation, which is the administration's part. So let me pause for a second. First, administration, any questions or concerns regarding kind of that line of next steps?
Yes. So thank you, AJ. So we have already been, we've had kind of two things happening at once. So our strategic plan process has been going, and we've been working with, Battelle, and working on our priorities. We've been developing those priorities. We've created, and I've provided for the board last Friday, the current state of analysis. We have our writing team. So that work has been happening for several months. And we have a design team meeting. We're bringing our 100-member stakeholders back together this Wednesday. So that work has been going. And we have those priorities that we believe are aligned with. We're going to make sure that those priorities encompass this work, the board goals, and the guardrails. So we're ensuring that those are aligned with this work.
So I don't find that, I suspect some of your board members may be a little concerned about that. I don't find it hugely problematic, except for my concern that if what you all are developing winds up being perfectly in alignment with what the board ultimately adopts, then it works, and you just got a head start on it. If the board's final landing place is significantly different from where it looks like it'll be right now, the board has given us some clarity around the general trajectory they're going in. They offered consensus on kind of that one pager, which is the high level. But that consensus could evaporate entirely when they see the metrics, and it's like, oh, you know what, we actually meant this. And that's a normal and appropriate part of the process. So I would put that out there to suggest that if, as we're going along, the board's work takes a significantly different trajectory, then that's going to likely require significant redoing of work that you all have already started. So that's the only thing that I have a little trepidation about.
Yeah, thank you, AJ. And I think the balance of that is our strategic planning process too. We too listen to stakeholders. So it's how do you balance listening to the stakeholders that, all the stakeholders we've listened to in different venues, making sure you honor those in this plan. And I think that's, so we may need to have I agree, we need to have some more conversations and some more work publicly to make sure that we have this seamless as possible and aligned as best that we can, so that there is no going back and the teams feeling that we're kind of working and we're not in alignment. So that's not what we want to do. Our teams have been working a lot in the last few months just on the process and aligning the priorities and the action steps and that work too, while this work has been done actually separate. So we have this work is going but they're knowing what the board goals are and the guardrails, so they're not doing this in isolation. Just utilizing and being mindful of the one pager. I agree with you, Board Member Cole.
So, that being said, one thing I want to clarify is that if there is disagreement between the stakeholder work that you all have done and the policy setting of the board, without question, 100% of the time wins that debate. And so that's the only reason I'm concerned is I think you're right. I think there's a good chance that they wind up meeting in the same place, since a lot of these conversations are with the exact same sets of stakeholders. It's a trepidation for me, but my hair is not on fire as a result of it. But the only reason I lift it up is because if the board pivots significantly from the trajectory they're on right now, then you all will be obligated to pivot with them. And I just want that to be, known, so that that doesn't seem like a surprise later. Again, the board has offered you high level clarity when they, said that they feel like the one pager captures at a conceptual level the direction they're going in. But I've just gone through this enough times that when you get down to the nitty gritty with the metrics, that often causes boards to kind of rethink and realize, okay, no, we thought we meant this, but now we mean this instead. This sounds like something that some of the board members want to be heard on. So before we continue our dive into guardrail 1, it'd probably be useful to check in with board members. Can we just for a quick second pause the screen share? I first saw a comment from Michael, then a comment from Carol. Michael, did you have something you want to jump in with?
No, I think I made my statement and that I agreed with you to say that we want to be very careful on how we proceed. I think it's just a matter of measuring our work. I don't know if that entails how much more frequently we meet around this or not. I think that the discussion around what we're doing up to this point has been collaborative. But this environment, I just want to make sure that moving forward, we're not perceived as dictating versus having a collaborative dialogue and building to, what is going to be something that is a shared vision amongst everyone. And one that everybody feels like they can also do, like it's your last comments about making sure that if for some reason we pivot, and it seemed that way the last meeting that we had, that like there was some space for pivot, particularly around big, hairy, audacious goal setting. That's another piece that I certainly don't want our superintendent, the administration, or other stakeholders to feel like they're blindsided by. But keep that in mind.
Yeah, so for example, one pivot that already occurred is from talking about a guardrail about a diverse staff to talking about a culturally competent staff. That is a very significant pivot, and how you would measure those in very different ways. However, operationally, I suspect everything that Talisa is working toward actually better fits with a culturally competent staff than it did with a diverse staff. And so that was a significant pivot, but I think it's a pivot that falls right in line with the direction the administration was going anyway. And so I think there's a strong likelihood that could be the norm. However, it could have just as easily been a pivot in a very different direction, away from where staff is already going. And that's the sort of thing that worries me, that would then trigger a need for kind of recalibration on the part of staff. Carol, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Michael said, because I think my hair is not on fire for the same reason your hair is not on fire, AJ, and Michael's isn't, because it's hard to imagine that we could end up in in opposing goals.
Yeah.
I think your point, it's pretty clear what our priorities need to be. It's clear what the community thinks our priorities need to be. I think we all get that. And I can't imagine that we'll disagree. But I do think the devil's in the details. And I guess my hair is on fire in that we've got to get these metrics and we've got to get them down. Because AJ's made me an apostle of, or a disciple of, pick your 3 or 4 things and manage the heck out of them. And you'll change your culture, you'll change your outcomes, and you can do really incredible work, but we got to get it down. And so my hair's on fire for that reason, less than I think that we're going to be working at cross purposes, because I feel like we got to get talking about the nitty gritty, and we started to last time on the goals, and I'm very concerned that we had to get back to them in detail again, and get those nailed down in measurable baselines and targets. And I'm just concerned that now we're kind of branching off and talking about guardrails, and we haven't really finished the goals, and it feels to me like we're a little at sea. And I'm very, very anxious to get this all done and done well. And that means that and the devil will be in the details, because we can all agree on the general goals and then be off working 500 different directions again. And it's kind of to the point of the MTSS guardrail, because I look at all that. I adore MTSS. I think that's the answer, a culture of that, and following that on both the behavioral side and the academic side. If our whole organization is thinking in those terms, what are we giving everybody? If some people aren't getting it, what do we have to give them to bring them back in? And if they're still not getting it, what do we really have to give them? That's how we have to approach every child. So it's not that there's any problem with MTSS, but when you say we're not going to let all of MTS go unfunded, we might as well say, we're going to, it's too big. And so until we quantify that, we're not giving direction to anybody about what our priority is and what it isn't. And that's what has me concerned. I feel like we're still having these high level generic conversations when we have to get down to nuts and bolts. Because when we get down to nuts and bolts in this MTSS example, we're going to probably be picking and choosing which, I don't want to say interventions because I think Terry was right, but which, maybe it's just MTSS with reading. And maybe it's just MTSS with restorative practices on the behavior side. Because we can't say all behaviors we want, all behavioral practices we want, because that's just the kitchen sink. So we still have to get down to the nitty gritty, and I'll stop talking.
Dr. Pierce?
So as I shared earlier, I have a concern with this first guardrail as well, and it relates to it being very broad and not specific. I too feel that we need to narrow the focus when it comes to this one, and we also need to be very mindful of internal and external factors that can affect funding. So specifically, if one support system, maybe tier 1 or tier 3, is affected by Title I funding. Say we have a shift in our Title I funding given the shifts that we've seen in attendance. Is that going to impact how much monies and resources are put towards a particular tier of support? When we think about the different resources that specific student populations may need when it comes to, for example, our ELL students, those resources, the transcription that may need to be possible, or the interpretation, the interpretation that may need to be made available to our families, those services might come at a different cost. Those services might be affected now by COVID-19. So I would like to see more thought around how we are going to, with specificity, focus our funds on the specific tiers of support for our specific student groups. In particular, I think I'm just a firm believer if we can help our most vulnerable students, we'll end up helping all of our students along the way. And so when it comes to this guardrail, again, we haven't specified what target population audience we're focusing our spending on in each particular area, whether it's academic or behavioral. So as is, I think the guardrail is too broad and there's not enough definition around the spending that will be occurring.
Any of the board members' reflections on the larger conversation about alignment? Though it sounds like folks have been heard on that, and I think we have a good plan on how to proceed. And again, one of the things we'll make sure to schedule ASAP is when is the upcoming conversation when we'll actually nail down the metrics for your goals and for your guardrails. So if you have questions about that, this is a good time to lift those up as well. Yeah, Jennifer?
I don't know if I have a question about that specifically, but I do agree with both Dr. Pierce and Board Member Beckerly. You know, I also think that we do have alignment and agreement with the big, and that's why we did consensus. So I think we're in the right direction, but I think it is about coming back with those metrics. I mean, it's just not using our tool that we keep preaching about equity. We're not using it if we're going to be super, super broad, right? So I just am backing up what Dr. Pierce said and Board Member Beckerly about the need. I don't need to keep talking about that. I do think though, you know, that's the next step of this. So I'm not sure what the rest of the presentation is today, but is this even worth our time right now, AJ? If we don't have the information we need to keep going to talk about the metrics. I mean, we can, if board members want to talk through, but I mean, I also don't want to waste our time if this isn't going to be productive. So AJ, as our facilitator, knowing that we don't have the metric piece, what are your thoughts?
I also want to say, remember that we have a strategic plan process that's going. And so what I shared with AJ is that we are going to make sure those processes, those pieces are aligned, because we've been working on some things that we believe are going, when we talk about whole child focus, we're talking about the MTSS system. And when we're talking about equitable opportunities, we're talking about closing the opportunity gaps. When we're saying strong learning communities in every region, we're talking about all of those, honoring those guardrails. So it's in the priorities that we've been working on. And so we're just going to have to just work in another, AJ and the team and the Battelle team, we're going to come together and talk about the approach, because what's happening, we have two fantastic consultants that we are working with, and we're going to have a meeting together just to make sure that we're aligning that work, and that our teams who have been working with Battelle and designing all the strategic planning work, that we're not duplicating, or we're asking them to do a separate set of work, right? And I think to AJ's point is, if the board is saying this is not what we want to see, and then our team has to go back and redo some of that work that they've been working on, and getting clarity and understanding of that would be different from what the board has desired. Okay. So I think bringing the two together, we're going to do that quickly. AJ, we're going to schedule that meeting ASAP, because we have some other, we're bringing together a team on Wednesday to talk about, we have our stakeholder meetings to talk about the work that we've done so far with our strategic plan and those priorities that we have been working on that we believe are aligned. But I agree, the next steps, I just said that we would bring those two together.
So I hear that, and you know, I'm not sure why it's both of these processes have been going on, and so this conversation about alignment is something that we continue to have. So that's a little frustrating. But your example is about you gave about the priorities, which are the third level in that chart. I think what we're talking about though are metrics around our goals and guardrails for you, and so that's what's missing. And so my question is, if we're not ready, I mean, that's not actually dealing with the thing you just said. So how are we as a board going to get ready to talk about goals and guardrails if we don't have metrics? And I'm asking AJ, can we? Is that a good use of our time today? I'm seeing head nods. No.
No, not really.
Okay.
So the problem is, and again, the board reached consensus last time on the one page. You said at a conceptual level, this is the right trajectory. Now we just need the metrics, and then we'll tie it up with a bow, hand it over to the superintendent, and then go and develop a strategic plan that ensures that these goals will be accomplished and these guardrails will be honored. And so because the superintendent has that at a conceptual level, I think she can already start trying to operationalize that around that. But again, having lived through this enough, until the board sees the metrics and says, this is the final blessing, these are our goals and guardrails, this is what we're going to work against for the next 5 years, anything could happen. And so I would be reluctant to go too far, too fast without the board having that part said. And then, because it's entirely possible if the board pivots on its goals or its guardrails, that you may look back and realize we have to actually change our priorities. One of the priorities that we have the wrong set in order to accomplish this change that the board's made and where we're trying to get to. You know, that this particular direct set of driving directions got us to the previous destination, but they don't get us to this new destination the board has set. That's the only concern that I have is I don't want the staff to build a lot of buy-in around something that then feels like they get the rug pulled out from under them when the board pivots, and we prevent that by getting the metrics in place as quickly as possible. And so I actually would encourage I actually would encourage an adjournment for the evening. I think the presentation that's provided this evening is going to be really helpful context for the board, and so I'd probably still share it with them. But until so last time we met, we saw the goals and we saw a set of metrics, and I think your team knocked it out of the park in terms of putting pen to paper on that, and then we were able to have a really productive conversation. Absent the metrics, it'll be harder to have that quality of a conversation this evening. That's to Jennifer's point. And so what would be ideal is to schedule the next gathering when we'll be able to have, here are the revised metrics, because I know you and your team have already worked on this, we've discussed it, and it sounds like you had some great just kind of epiphanies based on the feedback that you got from the board, and have started to put pen to paper on that for the goals. We want you to have that same type of opportunity as it relates to the guardrails as well, but the board won't be able to offer you that this evening without available metrics. And so for that reason, I think it'd be the better use of folks' time to pause on this evening and to schedule a date if you give us some insight into how close your team, I know your team's already done a lot of work on the goals, so I'm not curious about those. I'm more curious about how much more time your team will need on coming up with the metrics around the guardrails. And then whatever that date is, then I'd recommend we schedule for ASAP then. So that, and hopefully at that time, if we can get materials out to board members a few days before that with the revised metrics for the goals and the draft metrics for the guardrails, then it may in fact be possible to reach a place of consensus that evening. At which point, once a consensus on those metrics is set, you and your team can run. The board will need to formally adopt that, which would be at a separate meeting. But if they reach a place of consensus, then run with that, knowing that the adoption at that point is just a formality. And so we could find ourselves, if the board members have the goals, the draft metrics, guardrails, draft metrics, probably at least 3 days before the next time we get together, then it's very possible that this long journey that the board has been leading can come to a conclusion for all practical purposes at that meeting, which then frees you and your team up to go execute. Eric, I've seen you've had your hand up for a while.
First, let me say that I agree with the course that you're just now describing for the reasons that you've given and others have agreed with that direction. So I think that's fine. I do want to go back a little bit. Well, 2 points. First, as I was listening to, where some of this work is done and who does the metrics, and especially how specific we get with where certain funding goes, it just automatically raises for me the concern that board may be getting too deep into administrative or operational matters. And I say that often enough, but and I'm not even certain that fits here, but that's how it sounds to me. The second thing is that I agree, like I think we all do, about the need to go fast, get this done as quickly as we are able, but more importantly is we get it done right. This is going to guide us for some time to come, and I think that's just a higher priority.
Okay, so the next, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's why I was asking. Any other reflections? Yeah, go for it.
I do think that to some extent, I feel like, it may feel like it's a little bit of a monkey wrench in the effort you're doing with Battelle, Talisa, but really because we generally do agree that what's it called? The refining of the big picture idea to say, all right, what really are our priorities? I think that's going to help both efforts. Because you can't just say we're going to not fund all of MTSS because we're not in a position to do that. So I think that it's a necessary work either way. And so we're just kind of, asking for you to do that now because we need our goals set so that we can be done with it and you can move on. So I think you're going to find it's helpful in getting everyone focused.
No, I agree. I think this is good. Just know that those guardrails, that term as we dig into guardrails, the values, what the protection, I wanted to make sure that our team was clear on what exactly the board wanted to see and in what format do we want to see that. And that's why I have even for allocate resources for Stan and Scott Gooding. What are, we were thinking about what some of those metrics could be, but also we wanted to make sure we had clearly defined, equity. What does that mean? And so I was hoping to take this meeting too, to kind of still talk and make sure that when we're talking about those guardrails and what the board wanted to see, what the team that we're working on the strategic plan, that there's an alignment there. So when we're setting these metrics, we're not duplicating. So there are metrics that the team is working on for the priorities that could be also used for the for the goals or the guardrails. So that's why I was trying to make sure that we're not setting separate metrics for either piece. So we're bringing together the first step. I know I'll have a meeting with AJ and the Battelle team. They've met before. And so we'll bring those together just to make sure that we're traveling in the same direction. So we're close. I just want to make sure too that the work of the team and the people that we've been bringing together for this work, that we are not moving too fast and outpacing the board. And if we need to slow down, I need to just say to the Patel team that we need to slow down, and we can, and then just kind of go back and look at our calendar and reschedule some things. So we can always do that. We're not going to run ahead of the board and the board's, being comfortable about this work and our next steps. So that's why I think these special sessions are good. These are work sessions. These are sessions that we're working, we're getting clarity, we're making sure there's understanding. To go back to what Board Member Cole said, that this is a collaborative effort. And if we need to keep hashing it out and getting clarity on it, that's what we will do, so that we will make sure that it is right. It is what the board wants. It is what our team understands that we have to measure. And it is things that we can measure, and we can develop the reports, because I want to be able to calendar this stuff, come back and report out what it looks like based on what you would like to see. And that's why I have Dr. Klein here, because I'm saying there are going to be some additional reports. There are going to be some data that we're going to have specific that the board wants to see. Make sure that we have clarity about that. And that are things that's going to also make sure that we have, those priorities that are clear and measured as well. So I am okay. I love these special sessions because we're talking, we're dialoguing, we're making sure we have clarity, so that we can bring the right information. I can bring the right information back to the board.
Jennifer asked a really useful question. What I don't think would be useful is for any of your team leaders, and I'm grateful that you brought them with you, because I think that they add, especially as we get into the metrics conversation, they add a lot of richness since they're the content experts. What I don't think is useful is to ask them to kind of speculate on the fly. They won't do their best. None of us do our best thinking when the cameras are running. So if this isn't present, then I would just say skip it. But Jennifer asked, are any of them already have metrics in their presentation that they did want to surface with the board? Or if they don't, then I just say we hold off and then come back later when they do. But if any of them already are at that level that they want to surface metrics with the board as part of their presentation, then we could talk about that one in particular. Is that the case for any of them, or is this something you just hold on the whole batch until next
I would
time?
say let's hold on a whole batch, and then we'll bring them all back.
So I just want to clarify kind of where this puts us. One, the last meeting we had, Talisa, you and your team really knocked it out of the park. What the board was needing, was some high-level clarity on its goals, and so and a sense of your vision of what are the metrics that would be used to monitor those. And you and your team came through flawlessly, provided that we had a really great conversation. And so I just want to apologize. It's my responsibility to facilitate this conversation, and I did not clarify that as an expectation this round. And so I just want the board to be clear that I had planned with the superintendent, and her team being here to present. What I did not do was clarify exactly what I needed from her team to present. And so my apologies for that and for spending y'all's time in a less than productive way than we intended. But what we'll do for next time then is that we will, I'll work with the superintendent. We'll identify how long it will take for her team to wrap up the work that is already in progress. It's not that it just hasn't finished yet. That's all. And then we'll identify a time at least 3 days after that, so that we can get you all of the documents at least 3 days before the next one of these conversations. That way, if you want to reach out to the superintendent or me during those 3 days, get some basic questions knocked out that may allow us at the next meeting to largely reach consensus, so that we can keep this process moving. Is there anyone who has reservations about that as our next step? Anyone have reservations? All right, then that's what I'll work toward with the superintendent.
I have
Then,
a reservation.
yes.
It's not really a reservation. I just want to be clear when you say that the goals were hit out of the ballpark, which they were, and we had a wonderful conversation, that they're not necessarily finalized, because I have a lot of concern about the metrics. So I just want to put that in
No,
there.
what I
I
was
know what
saying,
you meant. I'm just clarifying.
yeah, what I was clarifying
We still have metrics to resolve,
is that her team was asked to do something and they did exactly what they're asked to do.
and they got us rolling.
Which helped move the conversation forward. And that level of clarity, I did not offer them this round. That's what I was trying to clarify. Any other clarity? Then with that, my request would be that we pause for this evening, and with the intention that we'll get a reconvene date out ASAP. Other questions or comments before I hand it back over to the board chair? Yeah, Carol?
I promise I'll stop talking, but I think that we should stop and acknowledge that this is the first time we're doing anything like this. Both, from the board's perspective, from the administration's perspective, and, we have to give ourselves all grace, because the next time it'll go a heck of a lot easier and a heck of a lot faster. And this is the first time you do anything, it looks like this. And so we're doing just fine.
You know what? Thank you, Carol. I really appreciate you saying that. That's good. You're right. We're going to get it right. AJ, you've been great at leading us this. We've been having some good dialogue. We'll just have this meeting with Patel this week and just make sure that we're honoring all of our stakeholders who we've heard from since we started the portrait work too. And blending those two and having and the appropriate metrics to report out on. So it's exciting. Just some more special sessions to happen as we with AJ as we continue to dialogue and work on. And then two, even a piece with the funding. Making sure that the things that the board wants to see from Stan in his shop, that we have those right reportings. We report that out to the board, and it's something that you want to see too. So I appreciate all of you and your patience as we work through this. We're working towards excellence always. And I think these special sessions allow us to keep at it, to keep asking those questions, to keep, as you said, we want to have those big audacious goals. So I appreciate all of you guys taking this time and making sure that we don't waste our time, that we utilize our time as efficiently, effectively as possible. So thank you.
Well, as always, thank you to you and your team. A joy to work with. Madam Chair, back to you.
All right, thank you. And so in the spirit of Relationship Week again, we're going to skip to Wednesday forgiveness. And we did a lot of that today about people standing up and saying, hey, I messed up and I'm going to take responsibility. And no one really messed up. I think Carol said it the best. I mean, in the last few weeks, this whole team has been, the team not on camera, has been amazing, getting us back to school, working through a lot of things. And so, everyone deserves a little grace. And it is so important that we will, we need to make sure it's done right. And so that's what we do as leaders. We're going to go back and regroup. We got a plan of action, and then we're going to come back and we're gonna create an awesome strategic plan. So I have no worries. Thank you all for your grace and kindness to one another and supporting nurturing healthy communities among us as we work together through this. Yeah. So with that, then I will just take a motion to adjourn this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Thank you, staff and team, and yes.
Dr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Vice President Reyes?
Yes.
And President Adair?
Yes.
That motion carried.
We have a consensus.
All right. Thank you all so much and have a great evening. And we will see AJ very soon. Good night.
Thank you all.